welcome to this week's Buddy Chat. I'm delighted to be joined by Chris Ashworth from Nominet. Chris, do you want to introduce yourself to everyone?
Yes, thank you, Bobby. Yeah, my name's Chris. I am the Head of Public Benefit at Nominet, and I work on lots of things to do with tech for good, digital skills, digital inclusion, data poverty, and anything where technology causes social opportunities or social problems in society.
Awesome. And for those that don't know, what is digital inclusion?
It is, I suppose, it's a concept that essentially says the world of digital is all around us. It's how we live, how we eat, how we shop, how we socialise, how we do our banking. And some people are on the wrong side of the digital divide, and some people are on the right side of the digital divide. And that can be because of poverty. So it's a good predictor of social mobility and whether society is inclusive or not. So there's lots and lots of people who have got the skills, the confidence, the motivation to live, fine in a digital world. And there's lots and lots of people who don't. So there are 1.9 million people who don't have access to device and connectivity, for example.
Yeah, and it's become even more necessary over the last couple of months, not only with lockdown, but also with recent announcements like universal credit's only going to be accessible if you do the online form, and that brings up issues for people who have access needs like disabilities that mean that they can't easily use websites. And yes, gov.uk has done a lot to make itself more accessible, but then there's also those people that can't afford a device or can't afford data, and in the current situation where libraries aren't open to the same extent that they used to be, and I know that a lot of people would access things online through their job centre and things like that, and that's just become more and more difficult. So I know that you were running a project at lockdown to help people get devices and get data.
Yeah, we were doing device.now, so a coalition of us were sort of asked to step up a campaign. And there's a big community of practice who've worked on digital inclusion and digital access for a number of years. So Good Things Foundation, the Online Centres Network, and lots of digital champion initiatives. So we did the bit that really I found really upsetting through the first instance of lockdown was that we knew the government had sort of told over 1 million people to shield, and we knew that they'd sent a text message to 750,000, which meant that at least 250,000 didn't have access to a device and connectivity. And if you didn't have access to a device and connectivity, and you couldn't rely on family support, and we know that loneliness and isolation is a real kind of like endemic problem, then you're basically ensuring that people will go to the pharmacy, will go to the shop for groceries, will go to the GP. And that to us was saying, there's the petri dish for COVID. And you have no choice but to go there. And it was heartbreaking to hear some of the stories of where people would basically say, shield because you have deep vulnerabilities when it comes to this pandemic, but you need to go there to go shopping. You need to go there to pick up your prescription.
And it's also about the messaging as well. Like so many charities and organisations that have been working in that space, one of them that I'm a trustee of, has found it really, really difficult because they're so small, they don't actually have the know-how in-house to communicate digitally, but also then know how to do that to those that don't have access. So quite often I run these monthly digital Q&As for charities, and at the start of lockdown it was very much we've sent all this information out on Facebook and no one's come to our events, and you're like, well, what's your demographic? What's your audience? How do you normally speak to these people? And there seemed to be this massive shift to digital without thinking of the user experience and what actually the end user was.
And I think this is it's we've got so many wonderful grassroots organisations in the UK who at the coal face of need during the pandemic really stepped up. You've got all the mutual aid groups, the food groups, and all of a sudden you're basically saying you need to go through the same type of digital transformation that takes larger organisations or commercial organisations years to go through, but there's nothing like a crisis to bring people together in ways that, I've worked for a long time on sort of emergency response stuff, and watching and listening to organisations say, there was one in Oxford near where I am who was saying we have really acute vulnerable users, service users. Our relationship with them is one of the only constants in their life. Literally our services have just stopped.
Yeah.
Because we've just lost contact with people who we might not see them again for 3 months. We're really, really worried. And, of all the, you can get into big systems thinking conversations and design thinking conversations about kind of, improving social mobility and changing society fundamentally, the fabric of society through lots of the work that we do in digital. But this was, at an absolutely fundamental level, people were going, I need 10 smartphones and I need them to be stocked with at least 3 months data. And I need to find my users. And we were talking to organisations up in Birmingham who were speaking to service users. It was their, for some people, connecting with a community group was their only point in a week where they'd have interaction with somebody else, and they absolutely depended on that face to face. And to lose that only thing in their life was just heartbreaking. And we hear stories of older people who's were struggling with their vocal cords towards the end of lockdown because they were not speaking to people enough.
Yeah.
And you're kind of like, we've got a really, really practical and obvious problem right now, which is about connection.
Yeah.
And we need to make sure that if you're locked down, you're not locked out, which sounds a bit like a soundbite, but that's there's no voice. Yeah,
it's true. And unfortunately, a lot of the work that you and the other people have been doing and focusing on digital inclusion for such a long time hasn't yet got to a point where social change has happened. And if you look back to the election in December and Labour's promise of connecting households for free, and it was laughed at, but actually I hope that lockdown's shown that would have been quite a good thing. And had it been rolled out in time, then there would have been less people. But it still doesn't change the fact that access to a device is going to cost you hundreds, if not thousands of pounds.
And I think that's it. I think that the debate, we were talking the other day about how does the debate need to shift at a political level from is digital all about fibre in the ground, copper cables, hard hats and tabards? It's not really. It's kind of about people and place. And there are other ways. There is definitely, to our mind, and we've done some research on it, and don't exactly know when we can sort of get it out and get it talked about, around data poverty being like food poverty or food insecurity. People travel in and out of data poverty on any given week, any given month. I don't think people quite realise that there are up to sort of 10 million people who are on pay as you go, who are using that on a cracked smartphone, cracked iPhone, and that homeschooling was impossible. They'll lean up against the mate's house. I was hearing this in 2018. People will lean up against the mate's house to get Wi-Fi signal.
Yeah, I mean, I know people. Well, I have friends who are working in care homes, and dependent on how many shifts they get that month, they don't have data. So then they can't then make their universal credit claims. They can't have their conversations with the job centre. They've got lots of support coming to them intermittently from the council to help them with their bills and stuff, and all of that is accessed online. So before lockdown, they were going to the local pub, which had Wi-Fi, buying a half pint, nursing it for 3 hours, doing all of their admin, and then maybe if someone saw them, that was a friend, they might buy them another pint, and then they might stay a bit longer. But
This is, do you know what? We said
But
this, I said
we're
this.
laughing, but
Yeah,
it's hard.
it's true. The biggest digital inclusion organisation in the UK, there's loads of organisations who do loads of really great work, like Lloyds Bank do a
Yeah,
fantastic amount in this space, and Gemma and the team there are brilliant, you know, the Consumer Digital Index and everything else. But we've said for a while that the organisation that has the biggest impact doesn't even know really it's in that space, which is McDonald's.
yeah,
Because it's had free Wi-Fi for
yeah,
years.
yeah,
When we ask young people, like,
yeah,
what's the biggest thing? It's either buses that offer free Wi-Fi or McDonald's, because you can buy a milkshake between 12 of you.
yeah.
Do exactly what you said. Spend 16 hours there, not get questioned, not get judged, not
Exactly.
get kind of.
It's like the new version of the internet cafe, isn't it?
It's basically with fries.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So
Yeah, I've done that as well in the
yeah,
past.
exactly.
You know, you kind of you're going in between meetings, and back in the
Yeah,
old days when you're in London, you're like, oh, I
you
don't
got
really want to spend
yeah,
60
toilet,
quid.
Wi-Fi, and fries. Like, literally, what more do you need in life?
Yeah, exactly. I can just grab a quick coffee and oh, I can make it a bit
Yeah,
special. I can get ready for the next meeting. Like
yeah.
it's
So I think that's it. I think that there's other things that we're talking about, trying to establish like a data poverty lab, and I think it's something that Good Things Foundation talks about recently. And I'd be really keen to like bring in lots of different voices and lots of different
yeah,
thoughts on that. We did zero rating at the start. We pursued the telcos to zero rate access to the NHS, which means it doesn't eat into your data.
yeah,
But anyone on the pay as you go, if you're visiting advice for coronavirus, it doesn't affect your data. And then O2 followed that by zero rating access to Mind, to Samaritan, to Citizen Advice. And I think there's probably an argument that the UK needs to think about, which is what now in 2020 constitutes an essential service.
yeah,
And if that is online, then those sites potentially need to be zero rated and need to be, you know, have an absence of and whether that's underwritten by government, underwritten by the private sector, something that's done as a CSR drive by telcos.
yeah,
But you know, there's millions of people going onto Google Classroom now that bubbles are bursting. There's millions of people, as you said, going onto the universal credit system. It
yeah.
doesn't address the skills and confidence issue. It doesn't address the
No,
device issue. But those things will follow if there's a structural change to.
yeah, because you also have that additional. Another friend of mine is very severely partially sighted, and doesn't have a device. They've been losing their sight for the last 20 years. So their last device was a 1990s Mac that they only got rid of a couple of years ago. But you know
It's not
they've
bad
been
going, yeah.
no, but they haven't been using it for that time. And
Yeah.
you know throughout the lockdown, we were kind of being slightly illegal, and I had my laptop in the house and he was outside, and I was like, what's your password? And it was just so dangerous for him.
Yeah.
Obviously, like, he trusts me and I wouldn't be sharing his password and access to that information, but I did.
Yeah.
You know, I helped him with his payment for disability payment, which people,
Yeah.
I can't remember what the acronym is, and you know that involved quite a lot of personal questions that I
Yeah.
had to ask him and had to type in, and you know he's self-employed and had to help him with a self-assessment grant thing because he
Yeah. It's really, really hard work.
and it's
And
just
yeah,
constant, and I'll
we
be
had
doing a
this
self-assessment in a couple of weeks as well.
nearly self-assessment.
Yeah,
But
nearly
do you know
self-assessment.
what? We had this, we were trying to, we brought all the sort of tech for good digital agencies together at the start of COVID to go, right, who's building what service
Yeah,
for which essential group? Has anyone got any code they can share? And so we can
yeah,
sort of like replicate that over there. And one of the questions that proved really tricky at the start was, how do we help the mutual aid army that's sprung up brilliantly all over the UK? So you know, if someone is going and buying the shopping for, we've got an elderly relative, not relative, elderly neighbour up the street, Peter, he's 93, and we were able to do his shopping for him
yeah,
online and then deliver it to him. But if someone's going to a shop and they don't know each other as well, but it's been through a mutual aid connection, how does someone like Peter, 93, shielding, pay for his shopping via a person he doesn't know and
Exactly.
can't get to a cash machine? And there's been digital solutions to it around trust, but it's that thing of, you know, everybody, even if they didn't know it, were being their life was being dictated by what digital and data can do.
Yeah.
So you have these passive consumer, non-consumers like Peter and your friend who are affected by digital but have no power, and it's that fundamental failing of the logic model of user-centered design. The world of tech has always quite rightly championed user-centered design.
Yeah.
Fundamentally, for government services, there can't be anything such as user-centered design if all the services are online, because it
cuts out too many people.
Yeah.
And and kind of similarly on the inclusion but more accessibility front, I've been working on a project recently where I've been doing lots of user interviews with people who have a variety of accessibility needs, and none of them were aware of the stuff that they could do on the website. So, you know, if they needed to zoom in, they didn't know about shortcuts like Control Plus to get the text bigger. So now it's like, well, best practice tells me I should do all the coding and should project manage that, but the user's telling me they want a button to click, which is a toggle, which is really not what I should be doing, but actually I should be doing that because that's
that's what the user really wants and needs. And there's so much good. I think there's a really good movement by Scope with the big hack.
Yeah.
And the whole inclusive by design momentum, and Microsoft, you know, calling out this is where the starting point should be.
Yeah.
And I think that's grown legs, but it's just another example of where I suppose the world of digital is very young. It's like a sort of, in the world of industries, it's a kind of like angry teenager.
Yeah.
And I think not quite matured enough in certain areas like this.
Yeah, and I think in some places it's not even angry teenager, it's stumbling toddler. You know,
running the other way.
Yeah, going, I don't know what to
traffic.
do. I don't like it having a paddy in the shopping market aisle.
I like this analogy. I think this one's got legs. Yeah, throwing a hissy fit.
Yeah, exactly. There are so many times that you just get a hissy fit of I don't want to because it's too difficult, rather than thinking about how that makes it better.
Yeah.
And I think the more conversations we have around digital inclusion and accessibility as kind of one thing.
Yeah. And well, I think there are 13 million people have a registered disability in the UK. Called the purple pound.
Yeah,
that is massive consumer power. I remember years ago at Oxfam, I was working with Unilever a lot, and it about their global supply chains and about, you know, the fact that 2 billion people live below the poverty line, and live in real actual poverty. And their view was, we can do business by doing good, but we can start to think about the people who are struggling the most are potential consumers of the future, and that gives us a good reason to invest in structures and systems that lift people from poverty. And I think if the tech world realises that, you know, a quarter of the UK population needs the technology to work for them, the massive impact that Alexa has had on people with accessibility issues. It didn't even know. I shouldn't say that. Did Amazon know the impact, the positive impact Alexa could have on supporting people with learning difficulties, with dementia, with the support structure around them? Was it intentional to design a product that works for the purple pound?
I would argue.
We'll have to ask them. But,
I would argue it's a happy accident.
It's a happy accident. Yes, a wonderful byproduct. But imagine if tech companies put that front and centre in thought, safety by design, inclusive by design. They're not just good principles to support people, they're good principles that result in a first mover advantage.
And I think people in some areas there is that paddy and that kind of stamping their feet going on, because it takes a bit longer to start having those conversations and to understand what inclusive by design might look like for the problem you're trying to solve. And sometimes actually that means creating what you need in a printable version, but also having it accessible to other people, because there may be people that, you know, have neurodiversity needs, who need to physically have something, read it over and over again, write notes to completely understand what it means to them.
Yeah,
they can't do that on a screen.
I think also that, like, it's obviously really, it's right to put the kind of emphasis on the tech sector as a whole. I think, what, if I'm honest as well, working from the charity sector space as well, and kind of like wearing my hat in that world, we've got a responsibility to our beneficiaries and to have thought about digital in the service design and how we represent policy and regulation and all the other bits, long words, to say, it's up to the tech companies, the rich, and they should be designing services that are inclusive from the outset. They should be listening to the voice of users who, you know, they should be judging the success of their product by how many people it reaches in terms of needs, not just wants, and all of those things. But if we're really honest, has the third sector, civil society, provided and moved in the same pace to say you need to represent these users well enough?
I don't think they have.
We've moved slow. We've moved
very, very slow. And I think actually the kind of move to potential inclusion has been driven more from a fundraising need than a beneficiary need often. You know, last year I was working on a project for a visual impairment charity, a tiny one. Well, I say tiny, regional, not national. So kind of medium-sized, and their website was filled with, if you want to book on this, email. And when questioning that with the team that were in place at the charity, it was, well, all of our service users have a family member or a friend that contacts us to get them. But there will be so many people that live alone, can't. And
that's a big assumption to make.
That's a massive assumption to make.
Yeah.
And I just said, have you asked your service users if they would want to book it themselves? And they were like, no, why would we?
This one works.
It all works fine. I'm like, well, it doesn't, because you're not seeing people book. People are calling up, and that means time. I mean, staff time. If you can set it up so people can easily book on one of your services through the website.
And how can you hold a tech product or service, whether it's a big multinational or a startup, whatever it might be, how can you hold it to account as an, you know, I know people just think sometimes charities are there just to raise money, but if you are a charity campaigning on a cause, you'll find it more difficult to hold the world of tech to account if you aren't already doing the same things and principles yourself. It's really hard to go, you should, because the same has always applied to every other cause. You can't campaign on modern slavery and then find out the charity in your supply chain
that are doing jobs.
Our CEO's an intern. It's you know, you've got to be living, walking the talk, which is really hard for charities on, you know, stretched resources, limited funds, limited access to you know, input. But some of the basics like that, you say, if we're going to be championing now digital inequality as an issue, as a social issue, or, you know, the myriad of other areas that need addressing, we need that voice of the third sector to be coming through really legitimately, and living through those methods themselves. And we've argued for a long time that, you know, thinking about digital in service delivery can reduce the operating costs of organisations as well. It's not always additional cost. And there's been progress, but it's really hard to ascertain just how much progress. There's 160,000 charities in the UK. You do an audit trail and go, how are you doing on your email?
There is progress on some levels, like on, you know, maybe creating better products. There's a lot of things that have been collaboratively developed recently, which is better practice. But there's still so much to do on accessibility and inclusion that I hope lockdown has kind of opened people's eyes to. But then, you know, there's a lot still to be done.
There is. I think one of the biggest things, I'm going to give a plug to Sarah Drummond and the Swoop crew. We're working with them at the moment to do design patterns for mental health services. And there is a need, I think, like with the scope work and everything else, to create a pattern library for organisations to easily include, you know, all the latest thinking and do's and don'ts and recipes and kind of replicable code for accessibility and inclusion. So, and I think we've taken this sort of principle to quite a few places for a while now, which is there's a way, because we're non-competitive in the sector, let's create patterns and rule books and information for, you know, product designers, service designers to be able to easily pull out the main blocks of what's needed and not start at the very start of a discovery chain of product development, but come in at the define stage. I think we've, you know, organisations like us and others who are working across lots of things, we've got an obligation to sort of collapse the cost of becoming accessible by design, inclusive by design, safe by design. And we can do that through things like pattern libraries, digital toolkits and things. They're not the things that get you, you know, shouted about, I think, in terms of look what we did over there, because you're creating a site for everybody in perpetuity that doesn't have an end game. But you know, but I think they're really they can make really profound changes, I think.
They can. I mean, you know, I just think about the design framework that was created on gov.uk. I'm now in meetings and going, oh, like this that they have on the design framework, and I'm like,
exactly.
You know, you're just talking about adding an information box, and you're like, well, what's on the design framework on gov.uk? Because we know it's accessible, we know, and we can adjust it to be within the brand guidelines. But we know that there are certain things that have been tried and tested.
Exactly, that's the thing. Someone has slugged away at that. Someone has spent a fortune somewhere in the midst of time. Don't spend their money again going through the same pain. Just read it. Yeah.
Definitely.
Patterns of the future.
Oh, well, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's all right. I can't believe I finished on that line. Patterns of the future. That's not a hill to die on, is it?
It's amazing. I love it. Well, I thought I better end it here.
Yeah. I think you should before I start waffling.
Thanks so much for joining me.
Absolute pleasure.
When you've got any more reports to share or anything like that, just
I will do. Thank you for having me. That was great.
Good.
Brilliant. I look forward to seeing it live.
Yeah.